What's your DNA test horror story? Story 1. Not me, but my coworker found out his bio dad was not who he thought he was. Turns out he is one of the many children of fertility doctor Donald Klein. There's a Netflix doc about him if you've never heard about him. My husband and I are about to begin the process of fertility treatments, IUI, etc. Naturally, my paranoid self was recently reminded of this story, so now we've agreed that we'll be getting our kids paternity tested at birth because I'm so worried about this. What he did was so violating and not actually illegal in my understanding. One of those things where we didn't think we had to outright ban, since it's so terrible we didn't think someone would do it. I'm a DNA analyst, and when we return from leave, we do competency testing and we can run our baby's sample as practice, so I know that I'm definitely the mother and my husband is definitely the father. So I tell people that we did paternity testing and I guess maternity testing too. If I ever did fertility treatments, I would also do testing. I would be a bit paranoid myself. Make sure you get a full medical history from the donor so that your child knows it when they grow up. I found out my dad wasn't my biological father, and that was one of the first things I asked my biological father when I reached out to him. I am lucky. He's an amazing man. My dad who raised me isn't the worst, but also not the best dad. And not only did I get the medical info, we have a relationship. Also, don't lie to your kid. At some point, you will likely have to tell them. Do it. Find support groups or a therapist who can help when the time is right. I'm speaking from experience and on behalf of several thousand friends of mine who have also found out that their parents, typically dads, are not their biological parents. My mother lied to me my whole life and I missed out on growing up with my bio dad and two amazing brothers. Thankfully, I have a good relationship with them now, but I have known them for just over a year. I'm 55 years old. It's very traumatizing to have been lied to for over 50 years. Kids find out. I did. Simply by taking a test to see my heritage. Let me tell you about my neighbor. After we first met her, I remarked to my wife, "Doesn't she look like the quintessential little old Jewish lady?" But no, she told us that she was not Jewish, but Christian and the daughter of a single mother, no sibs. Then the test results came back. Turns out to be a nearly identical story except for a different New York fertility doctor, and yes, quite Jewish. This guy was some kind of genius, and we still don't know how many women he inseminated. There are at least 12 siblings. After a few months of discovering each other, my neighbor invited them all over to visit. These folk were all well educated and most were quite successful in a variety of careers. Sadly, I didn't get to meet them. Story 2. My parents and I all did DNA tests, and I managed their profiles. Theirs were done before mine was available. They each got a panicked message from a woman on the other side of the world who had matched as their daughter. She was distraught, thinking her parents had lied to her for her entire life. When I logged into my account, it showed that I had no DNA matches with my parents, which I knew to be wrong, plus the fact my mom was a young child when this woman was born made it clear the company had swapped our results. Customer service just said, "Oh well," and offered a new test. My family found it funny, but that poor woman who had spent several days freaking out thinking her life was a lie before I got her messages and responded. I suspect this may have happened with my father. We both had tests done, but he refuses to share or talk about his results. Won't talk about it, but on my profile his brother shows up as my uncle, and my mom's sister shows up as my aunt. So unless my dad has a brother that no one has ever spoken of, I don't see any way he's not my dad. My own mom had a sort of similar funny to our family situation. She was matched with an identical twin and freaked out believing it had been secretly adopted out. Because she was born only 10 months after her older sister, very much accidental and not wanted, and no one would have known it was twins in the 1950s. Giving away the extra and claiming you only had one wasn't completely implausible. She worked up the nerve to check it out, and it was herself. Only then recalled she had already done a DNA test with the rest of the family years ago and then not bothered to look at the results. Bless my mom, she's very flaky. Story 3. My mom's generation has been really big into tracing our family tree. Turns out Grandpa had two families that we know of and lived down the street from each other. If that wasn't enough to discourage my family from uncovering skeletons, a few years later one of my cousins took a 23andMe test to find out that our maternal grandfather is also her dad. Story 4. Grew up pretty normal for the most part. Divorced parents, but happy life. Wanted to know my ancestry since I don't know my paternal great-grandmother's maiden name. Got the results this past Christmas Eve. Found a half-sister along with 2 other half-siblings who are too old to be my dad's. He'd have been a literal child and put 2 and 2 together. And it turns out my dad is not my father. Can't ask my mom, she's dead. My bio father is dead and no one knows anything, and the people I have told, no one on my dad's side, too scared to break that news, are shocked. I know nothing about this man but his name and his mom's name, who is also gone, I believe. I just found out this big old bombshell suddenly, and then hit a dead end just as quickly. It was an interesting and juicy Christmas for sure. I'm 55% Swiss though, which is random as hell. If you haven't already reached out to the familial matches, it may be worth it. Half-siblings, nieces, nephews, and aunts and uncles all have the same DNA percentage. The testing sites don't always get the labels right. There's a remote chance these could be one of your parents' siblings, and that the older mystery family member is a generation back. A parent could have been adopted and didn't know, etc. Story 5. About 3 years ago, I took a 23andMe test because I had always suspected or maybe hoped that my sister's dad was also my dad. He was in my life from the beginning because my bio dad was a piece of work. Well, he isn't my father, and neither is the man who I grew up believing was my dad. My sister-in-law did some digging and found my real biological father. He's the one who reached out, did a DNA test, wanted to meet me and my children and introduce me to my siblings. For a while, I held off because it was such a shock, and I felt like it was moving really quickly. 4 months after we had first started talking, we met, and I was welcomed with open arms by everyone. And even though it was still a little weird and I was super nervous, I'm glad I took the chance to meet him. He died from COVID complications just 8 months after we found out he was my real dad. After I called and told my father that I existed, I was welcomed into his family with open arms. I couldn't have had a better outcome. Meanwhile, my wife found her biological father and they've seen each other once. Turns out he has 2 other daughters who are half-siblings to my wife and to each other, who never talk to him or each other. Of course, my father is in the next state, 250 miles, while my wife's father is across the country, 2,300 miles. This story is incredibly similar to mine, except I didn't meet my bio dad before he passed away due to COVID complications, but his known family welcomed me with open arms at his funeral. My story was 5-ish years ago because my wife got pregnant, and I was motivated enough to finally seek him out. I went from 1 older brother to having an additional 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and about 3 years later we added another brother. Ha! My bio dad got around. Story 6. My cousin tried to scam the government, claiming a minuscule percentage of Native Americans submitted a sample. What did happen was 4 children he fathered and 4 women, other than his current wives, found him. This is extra funny because just having Native American DNA isn't enough to get any government support. You need membership in a tribe, and absolutely no tribe is going to include you based on a very small percentage of your DNA. My great-grandfather was born on a reservation, and I don't have and could never get a tribe membership. The DNA test could only ever hurt his scam, to be honest. Story 7. Found out, doing the ancestry DNA, that my paternal grandmother cheated on her husband with her, also married, family doctor. My dad has brothers and a sister that he never knew about. Dad says that the doctor must have known. He looks exactly like his brothers, and the doc used to always call him son during his appointments. His dad, that raised him, also must have known, because he treated him like crap, and made backhanded comments that, knowing what we know now, tell us he knew, or suspected at the very least. Story 8. One of my best friends called me one day in a panic. She did one with her father for fun. He is not her father. Turns out Mummy has many skeletons in her closet. Bio Dad never knew she existed but was so happy to find her. We now doubt her sister's father is her father. Just a gigantic domino effect of not good. The same happened to me long after my dad died. My mom wasn't helpful but finally gave me a name. Soon after she developed dementia. My bio dad is probably dead after some research. I'm on 3 DNA sites. The closest relative on my father's side is just over 1% related to me. That's at least 1 great-grandparent. I've messaged about 20 who were slightly closer and had no luck. I'm glad I found out, but it was an adjustment. It changed my ethnicity. Same for my kids. I'm leaving it to my dad's side of the family to draw their own conclusions. I really hope her relationship with her step/adopted/whatever dad is alright. What her mom did was an awful betrayal. But your friend was innocent and spent her entire childhood with that guy. Like, her bio dad conceived her, sure, but the other man really fathered her. Like, for I'm a humanist and refuse to believe in the Cinderella effect or biological determinism, we're better than just animals. We are better than animals, that's why it is so deeply troubling that she treated both these men and her daughter like animals, and still won't own up. Instead, she's choosing to gaslight them like it's some conspiracy against her they've been planning since 1985. Rubbing their hands together for the year 2021 to arrive so they could finally carry out their grand scheme of making her look like a terrible person. Story 9. Someone in my grandparents' generation gave up a baby for adoption 60 years ago, and our family still doesn't know/won't admit who it was. She only joined 23andMe because her daughters encouraged her to find out more about her birth family for health reasons. We now have family members who won't take the test. My kid's paternal grandfather was what one would call a hoe. He has fathered and abandoned many kids all over Oaxaca, CDMX, possibly San Diego, and Portland as well. He has admitted he does not know how many kids he might have, aside from the 8 he had with my ex-mother-in-law. I'm a little interested in trying 23andMe because I never met my dad, and I wouldn't be surprised if I had more siblings out there. I learned this Christmas that my paternal grandfather abandoned his wife and 7 kids at Christmas one year. No one knows why, and he was so kind not to share that information with my grandmother until they had already had my dad. When my grandfather passed, long before I was born, there was a dude at the funeral who was a doppelganger for my dad. Who knows how many cousins I have running around the US somewhere. Basically the reverse of how my dad's sister was found. He was the youngest of 6 when his father died 6 weeks before he was born. His mom remarried fairly fast, and the oldest 2 girls remembered her being pregnant again but didn't know what happened. Their dad, new husband, adopted all 6 children and was great to them for 14 years until his own death. 40 years later, the oldest daughter did DNA testing and found a match, their littlest sister. She gained 6 new siblings and learned her story. Sadly for her, she can't get closure on the why because their mother died almost 2 decades before she was found. Meanwhile, my own story, my bio father is apparently against DNA testing. Not surprising given what I know about his political views, but actually it's because of me. I'm his oldest. I've never met him, but always knew who he was. He denied I was his. My oldest half-brother and his wife did DNA testing to see what genetics had in store for them baby-wise. Much to his surprise, he got a match for a half-sister. My oldest half-sister vaguely knew I existed, but none of the others did. I've now met 4 out of 10 half-siblings. Half of them are still under 18, so I don't know about me. Might classify it as a horror story for them since they didn't know about me. Mine turned out to be a happy ending, but my aunt was given up for adoption. She was on several sites but only was able to fully uncover things when my grandmother passed and her records could be opened. Apparently, my dad was 7, my grandmother was widowed, and the baby was out of wedlock. She hid the pregnancy, quite a feat since she lived with her mom at the time. After opening the records, she found my dad. Her brother had also passed. I was listed in the obituary, and that was how she found out I existed. It took her several years to find me. It's pretty incredible because I almost know nothing about my dad's side of the family, and she has sleuthed half her family tree from that website. I wish I had the chance to grow up with her as my aunt, because we have easily been friends and have so much in common. Was going to add my story here, but it is almost exactly this, just at a later stage. We later found out that my great-aunt is the mother, and that she got pregnant as a young teen, arranged for a long-term trip to visit a friend in Texas, which she did not visit, and actually went to a covenant in Texas where she silently had the baby and gave her to the covenant, so she could go back home without anyone ever knowing that she had been pregnant. Somehow her plan worked. We found out about 2 years ago. It's been over 60 years. The only reason the daughter reached out is because she is at an age where knowing her family medical history is becoming more important for her doctors. Story 10. My father is from a country that is literally split in half. Half the country is ethnically Greek, and the other half is ethnically Turkish. There is a long history of bad blood, and our capital is split down the middle. We are culturally Greek, but thanks to my brother's impulse decision DNA test, We learned that we are ethnically more Turkish. Not really a horror story, but goes to show how stupid war is. Ah yes, my husband's family is Cypriot. Came to Australia in the 50s. We were never allowed to mention to his Yia that her favorite Greek cake shop had closed, and we now got her cakes from a Turkish shop instead. And we definitely could not point out that her own mother was half Turkish. Reminds me of a book I read about the dissolution of Yugoslavia and the Bosnia War. Suddenly, everyone was supposed to hate everyone else on sectarian lines. But in so many places, nobody knew or cared what religion their neighbors were. All these fault lines that nobody knew existed. War is so stupid. The religion thing was brought up later and mostly in Western books, since it's just so hard to understand what a mess up the Yugoslav ethnic divide was. What was worse was that you had a crapload of mixed families, and they had to choose sides. By religion, they were just told to go to one side of the monster battlefront, or the other and stay there. They were accepted on either side they went to, and they were persecuted by the other side regardless of how many people they had. And then, after the war was over, they just made up somehow. Key and Peele have a great sketch about this. Shivati Restaurant. Basically, two different restaurants are run by two people from different Balkan countries. These countries and their citizens don't like each other. However, they talk to the customers about the menu, preparation, and cultures, and they are identical, just in different order of operations. My dad is from the Balkans and died laughing watching, because of how on point it was. Story 11. Found out my dad isn't my biological father. My dad's sister gave me a DNA test for the holidays. I ended up taking it and discovered I wasn't related to my aunt, aka not related to my dad. But I have 10 plus half siblings with whoever my sperm donor dad is. They gaslit me for months saying the results were inaccurate, called me a liar to my sister, and all this garbage. Then finally admitted it was true after 6 plus months of lying. We now have a terrible relationship. Did your dad love you? And did he accept you as his daughter? Or was he a horrible father? I mean, maybe his world got crushed and your parents dealt with it in a horrible way, but maybe they just didn't want to believe that everything they had came falling down. The person I would be pissed at is your aunt. She had no business doing that. Are you me? Well, I now know the sperm donor is a cool guy, so we're a little different. Have you heard? There was no reason to tell you. There's a great Facebook group if you're looking for support, and a lot of assistance to find your biodad through genetic genealogy if you want. Story 12. My sister found out that half our mom's side of the family are products of incest, up and until a few great aunts and uncles. Story 13. I've got 2. My friend knew that she was the result of a sperm donor. She signed up for 23andMe and ended up finding that she has a half-sister. Then another, and another, and another. I think she is up to over 24 now, and almost all of them are half-sisters, and they all look so much alike. They have tracked down their biological father, and I guess he donated sperm in multiple states over the course of some years. He wasn't intentionally trying to have a dozen kids out there, but the rules of capping out didn't really catch him because of moving states. The other is more direct. One of my family members got tested and found a cousin, but that cousin had a single mother, born out in California. We live in the Midwest, and nobody has any idea who the father is. Probably one of my uncles passed away, or something along those lines. Based on my family history, everybody cheating on everybody, tons of babies in high school, kids not knowing that their fathers are not their real fathers, or kids being raised by their grandparents when their sister is really their mom, I refuse to sign up. I just don't want to know. It would just stir up crap. Ignorance is bliss. There are several instances of in vitro fertilization doctors who used their own sperm. I expected this to be what you were describing. One did it in his local clinic, and everyone started wondering why there were a bunch of funny-looking kids that all looked alike. The doctor was not a good-looking man. A friend of my family was a prolific sperm donor back in his college days. He did it to make money, on the side, mostly since he was pretty broke at the time. Well, all these years later, he's still finding and connecting with people who are technically his bio kids, who never knew him beforehand. Some are in their 20s and 30s. This is how my dad's side of the family is, at least with a few extended family members. Aunts marrying like 4 times, cousins running off and coming back with kids, confusing age gaps, and so on. So there's me, about 10 years old, intense bookworm who reads a lot of novels, including mysteries and Jane Austen type stuff, with hidden kids in the countryside for older age groups. kinda half-assed doing a genealogy project for some reason or other, and my mom randomly comes up to me to say, "You're going to find our marriage certificate, and on it you'll see that your dad was married before. But just know you don't have any long-lost siblings and you're definitely my daughter." Just remember going back to my room thinking, well, I wasn't questioning that before, but gosh, now I am. Thanks. Like, I would have shrugged at the divorce, but adding that last bit just felt incredibly unnecessary. LOL. Way to phrase it, Mom. Well, now I'm in my 30s, and I'm 100% sure that I'm my mom's daughter. Our looks, apparently like 4th or 5th gen ADHD behavior that's strong enough to literally trace it through stories, etc., but I'm also never gonna do anything like 23andMe for, reasons. Story 14. The wife and I both got tested. She had an incredible background: North American, First Nations, South American, Portugal, and all over Europe. It was so cool. When I got mine back, it said, "You're Scottish, mate." My mom was super excited to do one, wanted to know all the exotic places that she might be from. The answer? You're from where you currently live. 100% her family is clearly not very adventurous. My wife's a mix of so many things. She encouraged me to get tested since my family claims Native American history amongst other things. I was so excited waiting for the results. Pretty much straight out of England. Like more English than the Queen of England. I also found out half my line came from an island off Canada that had an accidental incest problem for a couple hundred years. Yay. My dear sir, do not mourn or grieve this new fact about yourself. Sometimes when you are in a bookstore or your wife has left her little e-reader app logged in, take a quick glance over how many romance novels feature gentlemen in kilts on the covers. It is easily a solid third of the market, second only to gentlemen whose intensely flattering clothes are described in more detail than their physical attributes. I assure you this was not news any lady-minded getting. Same thing with my girlfriend's mother. She is adopted and doesn't know her birth family. Has a darker skin complexion and dark facial features, and looks like she could be like European Baltic, maybe Greek or Turkish. Did a test and she's 80% Irish, 20% Scottish, and found her birth family lives in a town 40 minutes away. Story 15. I'm adopted and was hoping to find out family info and hopefully who my birth parents were. Found out my birth father abused the kids of one of his girlfriends and is currently serving 45 years. Also, he committed multiple armed robberies in the past. On top of that, he's into a bunch of weird Africans are the real Native Americans beliefs that he's using to try to get out of prison. Not sure he actually believes all of it, but he did a DNA test in the first place to try to claim to be a native. The whole side of my gene pool is into weird religious stuff. Plus, the guy he thought was his father isn't. His mom had an affair, and his real dad / my grandfather had recently also just gotten out of prison for attempted murder and then died from COVID. Pretty sure he was in the drug trade in Miami in the 80s as well. Safe to say I want zero contact from anyone on that side. My other half is Native, and the horror stories are just all the teams they went through in residential schools and literally being moved to Indian territory and being given the last name Orphan because all their family died. Also, my birth mother was basically stolen from her family and given to a white family, and none of her siblings even know she exists. I am beyond lucky I didn't have to grow up in any of that environment. Story 16. My kid took the test and 8 years later introduced me to a half-sister I never knew I had. My father had remarried and had a son I knew about, but this younger sister took us both by surprise, and the father in all of this has passed on, so I have a sister now. Story 17. My sweetie's mother had an affair after kid number 2 and ended up getting pregnant with number 3. His dad, his mother's husband, didn't bond with him the way he did with the older siblings or the 3 from his previous relationship for that reason. It was quite obvious as he got older too, being blonde, blue-eyed, skinny, and a high academic achiever versus being overweight with dark hair and brown eyes and not so academic like his 5 older siblings. Dad died 15 years ago and never had a good relationship with my hubby because he didn't care to invest much in a kid that wasn't his. Last December, during my pregnancy, we decided it was time for him to do 23andMe so that he could have some proof in hand before connecting with his mother's AP, alleged bio dad. And it's a damn good thing we did. Turns out that his sibling's dad was actually his real dad this whole time. Genetics are just kind of a crapshoot sometimes, and the affair was totally a red herring. My grandpa was told by his father that he had to be the milkman's son because he was the only blue-eyed blonde in a family of brown-eyed brunettes. Not only did one of my grandpa's nephews end up being basically his clone, but Ancestry confirmed it for good for me when I got contacted by a distant cousin who was adopted as a baby from Ukraine, where my great-grandfather was born. I found out as a teen that my father didn't think I was his kid. He was an emotionally distant and abusive parent, and as an adult I now understand that this was why. It haunted me for years, and I even contemplated trying to get a sample from his body before he was cremated, but didn't. My mother always swore he was my dad, but she was a proven liar about a lot of things. Covert, passive-aggressive narcissist. A few years after he died, my paternal cousin's son was 23, so I took one too, confirming my father was my father. My dad's twin's husband is really into genealogy, and by digging through old records found out my beloved Nana, Dad's mom, had been once married before Grandpa. It was a total shock. No one knew, and we couldn't find anything out about him. Records have conflicting info. We don't know if she was widowed or divorced. So that's fun. Story 18. Found out that my ex-girlfriend was actually my cousin. In college, I became a DJ at the student radio station and ended up meeting her through that. We became close friends almost instantly, and after a few months, she built up the courage to ask me out. When we started seriously talking and learning about each other, we kept finding more and more things we had in common. She was born in the same small town, about 4,000 people, as my grandmother, and her middle name is my grandmother's name. Wow, cool coincidence. We both have a family history of BPD and Raynaud's. Hey, we'll know how to take care of each other. Laying our arms next to each other, they looked nearly identical. It's like we were made for each other. After about a month of talking, she invited me to her apartment to cuddle and talk while she did some schoolwork. Things got heated and we were making out when we both had this moment of shared deja vu. Like, this had happened before. We made out some more, but didn't do anything further before she had to leave to pick up her roommate. The next day, she blew up on me over text, blocked me on everything, basically just gone from my life, and I was so hurt and confused because I really liked her, but she'd been pretty inconsistent, BPD, and it ended up for the best. A few months later, I'm talking to my uncle before Christmas dinner. He's a big genealogy nerd and has hundreds of years of our family tree plotted out on Ancestry. When I joined the conversation, he was talking about a gravesite he visited from some relative in the 1700s. At this point, I'm not really paying attention and just sipping my drink while everyone else talks. But eventually, he started talking about my grandmother and her siblings. I'm learning about my great-aunt, and suddenly I feel sick because it all slides into place. My great-aunt is my ex's grandmother. My ex is named after my grandmother, who is her grandmother's sister. We have the same bone structure, and our families have the same predisposed medical conditions because they're the same family. I haven't contacted her to tell her because how do you tell someone that kind of news? Hey, you know how we were dating and almost did it? Well, I'm glad we didn't because you're my cousin, ha. And I'm absolutely never telling my family because it just feels like the kind of thing I should take to the grave. But hey, Reddit can know. TLDR, my grandmother and my ex-girlfriend's grandmother were sisters. I'll tell you about this here. I was seeing a girl during college, but we grew up together in the same elementary, middle, and high schools. She came over to my parents' house one evening. We were sitting doing homework. My mom comes in and starts talking. Starts asking the girl about her family. My mother gets a horrified look. The girl's grandmother and my grandmother were sisters. I fell out on the floor laughing. My mother is yelling, "It isn't funny!" The girl had to tell my mom, "I was adopted, we're not related." Very few people on either side of the family had known the girl was adopted. Story 19. Not a horror story, but certainly unexpected. My sister did 23andMe and matched with a niece. Apparently my brother, 40M, unbeknownst to him, has a daughter. From her age, we can tell she must have been born when my brother was in high school. The bio mom must have given her up for adoption without telling my brother. No bad feelings, they would have been so young, like 15 years old, so it was for the best. And that's how my 82-year-old stepdad learned he had a 64-year-old daughter. The main surprise was the daughter had tracked down her birth mother in pre-23andMe days, but the mother had identified someone else, already deceased, as the father. The birth mother also passed away before my stepdad found out. We have no idea if the birth mom honestly didn't know, or since her family knew, the other guy was just trying to keep things tidy on her side. Do you know one of my mom's good friends from high school was also friends with the birth mom in high school and was, well, can't say that shocked me? She knew enough from back in high school to know of the pregnancy, but had doubts about who was identified as the father, but not enough to know it definitely couldn't have been him. Story 20. Summary: got their parents arrested for murder. It's not my story, but one known around Ireland. In the 1980s, a dead baby was found on a beach in South Kerry. It had been stabbed many, many times. A massive investigation occurred, and there were appeals for the mother to come forward. In Ireland's dark past, we have treated women, especially unmarried mothers, terribly. A woman on the opposite side of the country was wrongly accused of killing the baby and dumping it 3 hours away. She had given birth to a baby who was stillborn, which they buried on their farmland. Her family was coerced into signing false confessions by our police force that she had killed the baby in South Kerry, even though she did not. Fast forward to 2022, there was suddenly a middle-aged married couple from South Kerry who were arrested on suspicion of killing the baby. Their child, who was in their 20s, submitted their DNA to an ancestry site. They got hits, and one of them was for a murdered baby found on the beach. They haven't been convicted. The trial hasn't happened yet. Story 21. My mom is an orphan. Did the test, discovered she's a 5th-generation orphan on the maternal side. Yes, her mom, and her mom's mom, all orphans. Her maternal grandfather went to prison for 5 years for arson when he was caught burning his house down for insurance money during the Great Depression in the 1930s. Her paternal side revealed her grandpa was murdered on a bridge over a river in Kentucky smuggling whiskey during the Prohibition. His murderer served only 4 years in prison, and it is still a precedent in Kentucky's Court of Appeals. Both of these stories/events happened within 5 years of each other and 1 state apart. This all makes sense if you knew my mom. She stabbed my dad in the heart with a fork, and then tried to run him over with her Dodge Dart Demon in the 70s, and now all that crazy crap I've done in my life suddenly makes sense. Genetics! Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you want to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.